The air in Dallas crackled with a familiar, almost ritualistic energy. Outside the sprawling convention center, a fleet of media vans hummed, their satellite dishes pointed skyward like metallic sunflowers soaking in the Texas sun. Inside, the grand auditorium of the conservative conference was a sea of red, white, and blue. Flags draped from every balcony, their stars and stripes a silent testament to a movement that prided itself on unwavering principles. Influencers, armed with ring lights and boundless enthusiasm, live-streamed from the bustling hallways, their voices a constant, excited murmur against the backdrop of earnest policy discussions and the clinking of coffee cups. It had all the makings of a predictable headline storm, a gathering of the faithful, a reaffirmation of values, a polite nod to the future. But beneath the veneer of practiced decorum, no one, not even the most seasoned political operative, expected the seismic shift that was about to unfold when the schedules of Karoline Leavitt and Mike Pence placed them back-to-back on the main stage. Mike Pence, ever the embodiment of steadfast conviction, stepped to the podium with the calm assurance of a man who had walked this path countless times before. His voice, a familiar baritone, resonated with the composed predictability that had defined his career. "We must preserve our values with dignity," he declared, his gaze sweeping across the expectant faces. "We cannot let emotion override strategy." Every word was meticulously chosen, every pause perfectly timed, a masterclass in the kind of measured rhetoric that had once been the bedrock of conservative leadership. "The future of conservatism is not in shouting," he continued, his voice gaining a quiet intensity. "It's in staying the course." The polite applause that followed was a well-rehearsed symphony of agreement, a comfortable rhythm that had long defined the movement's beat. Backstage, bathed in the cool glow of a monitor, Karoline Leavitt stood, arms crossed, a silent, unblinking observer. Her jaw tightened with each carefully articulated phrase from the stage. "That's your legacy," she muttered under her breath, her voice a low, simmering scoff. "Staying the course while the left burns the map." To her, Pence's words were a relic, a soothing lullaby for a dying ideology. "He sounds like a bedtime story for dying ideas," she quipped to her aide, a sharp, cynical edge to her tone that belied her youth. At just 29, she was already whispered about in certain circles as the future firebrand of the right, a label she wore not as a burden, but as a badge of honor. A stagehand's motion broke her focus. "You're on in 60 seconds. The words were a spark. She uncrossed her arms, a subtle shift in her posture, and stepped towards the wings. Her heels clicked with a deliberate purpose, each step a declaration. Her navy blazer, impeccably tailored, hugged her frame, and the silver cross on her collar gleamed under the burgeoning spotlight, a silent counterpoint to the storm brewing within her. Where Mike Pence had been a calm wave, predictable and steady, Karoline Leavitt was a wildfire, contained for now, but ready to consume everything in its path. The stage awaited, and with it, the beginning of a new, far less dignified chapter. The stage lights, once a gentle glow, intensified as Karoline Leavitt stepped into their embrace. Her heels clicked with a sharp, decisive rhythm against the polished floor, each sound a percussive beat announcing a new cadence. Where Pence had moved with the measured grace of a seasoned diplomat, Leavitt advanced with the predatory confidence of a lioness entering her domain. Her navy blazer, a stark contrast to the conservative sea before her, seemed to hum with an unspoken energy. The audience, still politely buzzing from Pence's measured address, stirred, a collective intake of breath as the air itself seemed to thicken with anticipation. At 29, she didn't just walk onto the stage, she owned it, her presence a magnet pulling every eye, every lens, every live-streamed pixel. "Thank you," she began, her voice sharp and clear, cutting through the lingering hum of the crowd like a freshly honed blade. It wasn't loud, not yet, but it carried an undeniable edge. "I just watched a very gentlemanly speech, very calm, very rehearsed, almost soothing." A ripple went through the audience, a few nervous titters, a few knowing nods. "But this isn't a tea party." The words landed with the subtle force of a thrown gauntlet. The murmurs grew, turning into a low hum of curiosity. She paused, letting the implication hang in the air, then continued, her voice gaining a steely resolve. "I respect Vice President Pence's years of service, but let's be honest. Calm and careful hasn't exactly helped us win, has it? We've stayed the course right into cultural collapse." Gasps erupted, quickly followed by a scattering of cheers that grew into a defiant roar. Backstage, Mike Pence, who had been watching from the wings, felt his brow furrow. His lips tightened into a thin line. She hadn't just referenced him, she had targeted him, subtly at first, then with the precision of a sniper. Leavitt, oblivious or uncaring of his reaction, paced the stage like a caged tiger, her voice rising in intensity. "This generation," she declared, her eyes burning with conviction, "isn't afraid of confrontation. We don't need lectures about restraint from people who watched statues fall and said nothing." Boom! The crowd exploded. Phones lit up across the auditorium, a constellation of screens capturing the moment. Hashtags, fueled by the raw energy, formed in real time, already charting her ascent. Pence turned to his aide, a single word escaping his lips. She just made it personal. "Sir," the aide replied, his voice barely a whisper, "she's not done yet." And she wasn't. Leavitt didn't need a teleprompter. Her words flowed, unscripted from a wellspring of truth and fury. Her voice now a weapon cut through the auditorium like a blade. "We're not losing because the left is strong," she asserted, locking eyes with the crowd, her gaze sweeping over them, making each person feel seen, heard. "We're losing because our own leaders are weak." Boom! Another cheer, louder this time, a wave of sound that threatened to lift the roof. She turned slightly toward the wings, a subtle, almost imperceptible tilt of her head. She knew Pence was watching. "They told us to stay quiet, stay polite, stay obedient, while our kids were being taught to hate this country." A few people in the front row stood to applaud, then more. The energy had shifted. This wasn't just a speech anymore. It was a rebellion. "Mike Pence," she said, for the first time uttering his name out loud, her voice ringing with a newfound authority, "represents the old Republican Guard, respectable, polished, careful, but careful doesn't win battles." Backstage, Pence took a slow, deliberate breath. "She's burning the bridge while I'm still standing on it," he muttered, the words barely audible. His aide shifted nervously. "Sir, if you want to respond." "No," Pence said sharply, his eyes still fixed on the screen. "Let her finish." The wildfire had truly ignited. The applause for Karoline Leavitt still hung in the air like smoke after an explosion, a tangible, buzzing energy that refused to dissipate. It was into this charged atmosphere that Mike Pence was expected to reclaim the stage and the room. He adjusted his tie, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, his steps measured as he walked towards the podium. Behind the calm exterior, his thoughts churned, a tempest of frustration and calculated resolve. As he took the microphone, a few claps sprinkled the room, polite, restrained, a stark contrast to the roaring ovation Leavitt had just commanded. His crowd had just been stolen, not by a rival, but by a rising tide from within his own ranks. He cleared his throat, the sound thin in the cavernous space. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice regaining its familiar, composed timbre. "Passion is admirable, but principle is what holds this nation together." Silence. The words, once a rallying cry, now seemed to echo hollowly. He tried again, his voice tightening with a subtle strain. "We are not Democrats. We don't scream. We don't tear each other down to make a point. We rise above." A few nods rippled through the front rows, but many arms remained crossed, a silent, unyielding barrier. Backstage, Karoline Leavitt watched from the monitor, arms folded across her chest, a faint smirk playing on her lips. "He's floundering," she whispered to her aide, the words laced with a quiet satisfaction. "Trying to sound like Reagan in a cage match." Pence continued, his voice now tinged with a defensive edge. "I've served this country for decades. I've stood beside giants, President Trump included, and I've always believed the conservative movement should be based on faith, not fury." Then his eyes, usually so placid, sharpened, locking on to an unseen point beyond the cameras. "But let me say this directly. I will not take lectures on courage from someone who's never sat in the Situation Room, from someone who's never had to choose between chaos and constitution." Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by a smattering of cheers, a flicker of fight, a desperate attempt to rally his base. Backstage, Leavitt's smirk widened. "There it is," she said. He finally threw a punch, but it was too little, too late. Pence's voice softened, returning to his familiar cadence. "I believe in grace. I believe in order. And yes, I believe in restraint. Not because I'm weak, but because I've seen what happens when leaders forget humility." There was weight in his words, a sincerity that had once moved millions, but it lacked the momentum he desperately needed. Because no matter how many times he invoked grace and restraint, everyone in that room knew Karoline Leavitt had already won it. As Pence stepped down, the applause was respectful, not roaring. The echoes of confrontation from Dallas were still reverberating, but for Karoline Leavitt, they were not a cacophony of chaos, but a symphony of assent. Her phone, once merely a tool, had become a conduit for a surging movement. Volunteers flooded her inboxes, donors doubled down on their commitments, and influencers, sensing the shift, clamored to align themselves with the new fire. She was on a plane to Florida for her next appearance, first-class seat, laptop open, the digital world buzzing around her. Her team was growing faster than they could hire, a whirlwind of energy and ambition. Everyone asked the same question: what's next? She looked out the window, the clouds a serene blanket below, and a thought, almost an admission, crossed her mind. "I didn't mean to start a war with Pence, but perhaps," she mused, "it needed to happen." An aide tapped her shoulder, interrupting her reverie. RNC's sent a formal letter. She opened the PDF, scrolling through the carefully worded paragraphs. Concerns regarding tone, unity, future viability. May request a meeting to clarify alignment with party leadership. Karoline laughed out loud, a sharp, unburdened sound. "They want a meeting?" she said, a glint in her eye. "Tell them they can tune in to my next speech." In another corner of D.C., far from the digital storm, Mike Pence met privately with a small group of faith leaders, their faces etched with concern. "She doesn't understand that leadership takes patience," he told them, his voice heavy with a wariness that went beyond mere fatigue. "She's weaponizing fire instead of channeling it." One pastor, his gaze direct, offered a quiet, uncomfortable truth. "And yet your silence isn't converting anyone." Pence flinched, a subtle tremor in his composure. The game was changing, and both of them knew it. Karoline's next rally was different. Not just in size, that was growing exponentially, but in tone. More American flags waved, more young voters packed the venue, and Bibles, clutched tightly, were visible throughout the crowd. The air buzzed with something that felt less like politics, more like revival. She stepped up to the podium without music, without theatrics, just her and the mic. "People ask why I went after Mike Pence, why I disrespected a former vice president." A few chuckles rippled through the audience. She leaned in, her voice sharpening, cutting through the calm. "I didn't attack a man. I confronted a mindset. The one that says Christians should be quiet, polite, apologetic, while this country mocks our God." Applause thundered. "I watched churches get shuttered, and no one in D.C. raised their voice. I watched drag shows in schools, and no one in D.C. did a thing. And the one person who could have spoken up hid behind scripture and silence." The room roared. Meanwhile, Mike Pence watched from a green room in Iowa, about to speak at a faith and values summit. He'd heard the clip again and again. "She's using religion like a hammer," a pastor beside him muttered. "No, Pence said quietly, his gaze distant. "She's using it like a flare." Later that evening, Pence stepped up to his own podium, his tone grave. "I do not believe rage is a fruit of the Spirit," he said. "I do not believe that faith is loudest when it shouts. Faith is strongest when it sacrifices." But the crowd wasn't moved like it once was. Something had shifted. Afterward, reporters asked him directly, "What do you think of Karoline Leavitt invoking God to challenge your leadership?" He paused, a long, telling silence. "She's bold, but boldness without reverence becomes chaos." Karoline's team clipped the response and posted it online within minutes, with the caption, "Pence still doesn't get it. Reverence isn't passivity." The video went viral. Pence had theology, Karoline had momentum, and the battle for the soul of the GOP just turned spiritual. It was supposed to be a closed-door town hall in Indianapolis, no cameras, no press, just Pence and a few dozen Republican donors. But someone leaked a video. In the now viral clip, Mike Pence, voice tired, posture heavy, leaned into the microphone and said, "We built the conservative movement on discipline and values. What we're seeing now isn't a movement, it's a rebellion. And frankly, it's reckless." The reaction online was nuclear. Conservative firebrands reposted it with fury. "So we're reckless now? Pence just declared war on the base." Karoline was right. They hate the people they claim to represent. Within hours, #reckless trended nationwide. Karoline responded with a single tweet, "We're not reckless, we're done being silent." That night, she appeared on a primetime show. The host leaned in. "You've basically declared civil war on the old GOP. What's the endgame?" Karoline didn't flinch. "I don't want to burn it all down. I want to light a fire under the parts that forgot how to fight." Meanwhile, Pence's campaign staff panicked. Donor calls were being canceled. Polls showed his favorability plummeting among Republican youth. Inside his team, an argument broke out. "We need to answer this head-on. TV ad, full response, show leadership." "No," another countered. "Every time we mention her, we amplify her." Pence sat quietly, then finally spoke. "She doesn't need my help going viral, but I won't sink to rage politics." That was his line, and he wouldn't cross it. But the base already had. At a small campaign stop in Ohio the next day, a woman stood up during Pence's Q&A. She wore a cross necklace and a shirt that read, "I'm reckless for truth." "I voted for you," she said, her voice clear, "but now I think maybe Karoline is right." Pence's smile faltered. The crack in the foundation had become a fault line. The moment came quietly, not with fireworks, not with scandal, just a poll. A national primary snapshot flashed across every screen. Karoline Leavitt, 31%. Pence, 12%. The shift wasn't subtle anymore. It was seismic. That night, Karoline walked onto the stage in Texas beneath a massive banner. Not just the future, the fight. She didn't gloat. She didn't even smile. Instead, she opened with, "This isn't about beating Mike Pence. This is about replacing a mindset that let America fall asleep." She paused, scanning the thousands before her. "They say I'm reckless. I say they're relics." The crowd erupted. Back in D.C., Pence prepared for what his team was calling the Reclaim the Roots Summit. But deep down, even he knew roots don't sway hearts like fire does. Still, he pressed on. On stage at the summit, Pence delivered what might have been his best speech in years. Sober, sincere, scriptural, he spoke of humility, grace, and preserving dignity in politics. The applause was polite, warm, controlled. Hours later, Karoline's clip from Texas had 8 million views. Pence's speech barely cracked 50,000. Then came the editorial in the Washington Post. The GOP's future isn't moderate, it's unapologetic. Leavitt doesn't represent a faction. She is the base now. Karoline's phone blew up. Campaign chairs, podcast invites, donors doubling down. Even independents were starting to ask, who is this woman? But in her hotel room, she stayed quiet for a moment. staring at a Bible on the nightstand, cross pendant resting on her collarbone. This started with truth, she thought. Let it stay rooted there. Meanwhile, Pence met privately with several party elders. "She's eclipsed you," one said bluntly. "I know," Pence replied, "but there's still room to show what grace looks like." "Grace doesn't go viral," another said. He nodded. "But it endures, a soft truth, but a fading one." The stage was set for the annual Conservative Values Convention. Traditionally a calm gathering of Republican leaders, this year it felt like a battlefield. Two keynotes, two figures, Mike Pence and Karoline Leavitt, old guard versus new fire. Pence went first. He delivered a powerful, heartfelt speech about service, faith, and restraint. He quoted Lincoln. He asked for unity. He warned against the allure of outrage masked as leadership. The applause was long but not electric. Then came Karoline. She didn't walk on stage, she stormed it. No teleprompter, no notes. "I respect Mike Pence, but I refuse to inherit a party that confuses silence for strength." Gasps, applause, a few stunned faces. She pointed to the crowd. "Do you feel heard? Do you feel defended? Because I don't, not by polished speeches, not by careful words, and definitely not by politicians who'd rather pray in private than fight in public." She paced, eyes burning. "This isn't about rage. It's about recognizing a system that let us down while patting itself on the back." The room crackled with tension, then cheers. Backstage, Pence stood still, watching her on the monitor. He looked tired, not angry, not bitter, just quiet. "Legacy is earned," he whispered, "but maybe hers is being written now." After the convention, headlines flooded in. Leavitt dominates conservative convention. Pence drowns in applause for his opponent. The GOP's new voice is 30 years younger and 10 times louder. Karoline's speech was clipped, captioned, and reposted 100 million times. By the end of the week, she was on the cover of every major conservative magazine, arms crossed, cross necklace gleaming, with the bold title, "Revolution in Red." Mike Pence announced a quiet withdrawal from the race 2 weeks later.